The reaction has been and continues to be outrage. Authorities here are livid, and they say that this is yet another example of NATO attacking innocent civilians. This morning at a briefing, federal ministry officials said that there have been 1,000 civilian casualties, the highest number I've heard yet since the raids began. And they think that the example yesterday is the most vivid one yet. And they are also quite upset by NATO's contradictory and conflicting explanations of what happened. And I would imagine that after hearing what the NATO has said today, that they still don't think that the whole truth of what happened has been revealed. The authorities here maintain that there were a number of attacks on that convoy, that there was no Serb military in the area that would have launched any kind of anti-aircraft defense. They think that NATO is just lying about the whole incident.
All right, Ron Allen reporting from Belgrade. Now, for more on this convoy bombing, we're joined by Ambassador Vladislav Jovanovic. He's the Yugoslav ambassador to the United Nations. Mr. Ambassador, thank you for being with us.
You're welcome.
Let me start by asking you this. What does the Yugoslav government claim happened in this incident?
But what happened is very transparent, very visible. As a matter of fact, a large column of the Albanian citizens who returned from Albanian frontier to Yugoslavia, to Kosovo, central part of Kosovo, were targeted by three warplanes of NATO. There were no any military objects or any military convoy around. It was one clean area, no forest, no houses. So there is no any excuse for pilots not to see that the people down on the road were civilians and not military at all.
Well, Mr. Ambassador, are you suggesting that NATO pilots were targeting civilians?
In view of the situation that everything was clear and that it was a clear day, the civilians were very visible, one cannot stop thinking and concluding that the message was to be sent to Albanian returnees not to return back. NATO would like to have one empty Kosovo in order to easier deal with our army and our military objects. Civilians are one obstacle to achieve that.
Mr. Ambassador, let me tell you what Jamie Shea, the NATO spokesman, said at the briefing today. He said that the pilot who dropped these bombs was risking his life to stop human suffering in Kosovo and to allow the refugees to go back home. He says the Serbs are responsible for burning down villages and that accidents are going to happen in war. Your reaction?
This is a stereotype accusation. Whenever NATO aggression is to be intensified, or whenever NATO finds itself in a difficult situation to explain some of its crimes against civilians targets, then they recur to the false accusation against Yugoslavia and try to talk about rapings of burning houses or all kind of such nonsense. The fact is that...
Nonsense, you say?
Yes.
Nonsense that ethnic Albanians are being raped, nonsense that Serbs are burning villages, nonsense that Serbs are forcing people out of their homes.
The only truth is that our security forces have been engaged against the strongholds of KLA terrorist organization, and their strongholds were usually in some Albanian villages. As a result of that, some Albanian villages suffered because it was the only way to neutralize the strongholds. But it is not true that our security forces do the practice of burning the villages or the so-called scorched earth. We don't do it, and we have invited many times our Albanian citizens to return, not to leave. You don't invite the people to return if you want to get rid of them.
Doesn't sound like many of them are taking you up on that. Let me ask you this one question with regard to the Secretary of Defense who appeared on Capitol Hill today. Mr. Cohen said a little while ago that it is grotesque that your president, Mr. Milosevic, is calling this incident an atrocity. He went on to say that when Mr. Milosevic is responsible for this brutality and savage slaughter of innocent people, the ethnic Albanians, it's ridiculous for him to be calling this an atrocity. Let me get your reaction to that.
But you know, Defense Secretary Mr. Cohen is in such a difficult position that he cannot be expected to say other things than to blame the other side, because it was so evident case of a massacre of civilians, whether intentional or unintentional, but the fact is that the civilians were massacred, and a lot of people who wanted to retire and to stay in peace in Yugoslavia were very badly punished for that. They are killed, or many of their relatives are killed. It is not something to be dismissed lightly, or to avoid responsibility for that by blaming the other side.
Mr. Jovanovic, thank you very much for joining us today.
You're welcome, sir.